Holy and gracious God, I speak in your name and in your presence, asking that my words would be pleasing to you, guided by your Spirit, and that the hearts and minds of your people would be open to hear you speak. Through Christ our Lord, I pray. Amen. For many, the Road to Emmaus story is the quintessential resurrection story, the quintessential Easter story. And I'm kind of in agreement with that. And partly it's because Luke is such a powerful storyteller. On the road to Emmaus, Luke tells us, he connects many of the resurrection stories. They're talking about these things that have happened, and some women have reported to them that they went to the tomb and found it empty, and angels said Jesus is risen, and Peter went, or some of the others among them ran to the tomb and found it empty as they had said, and stories are floating around, and yet Jesus is gone, and they thought he would be the hope of Israel, so they're discouraged and downtrodden. At the end of the story, when they have recognized Jesus in the breaking of the bread and they go find the 11, there the 11 are telling stories. Now Peter has also gone to the tomb, and Peter has also heard or seen the risen Lord. And he is risen indeed, they say. So Luke collects all these stories for us. And then the way Jesus intersects them is, for me, very instructive. He just saunters up alongside them, and they don't recognize him. Now, Luke uses a theologically pregnant phrase. Their eyes were held back, or literally it says kept from recognizing him. That's often what we call a divine passive. So it's stated in the passive voice to indicate that maybe God has done this. We're not really clear. And then when they recognize him in the breaking of the bread, it says their eyes were opened. Again, it's a passive voice. And so Luke leaves it ambiguous as to why has this happened that they don't recognize him. But he comes alongside them in an inobtrusive way and asks them what they are talking about. So he inobtrusively enters into their world and listens to them. Now, it's possible that when Jesus says, "Oh, you who are so foolish of heart to believe," it's possible he's chiding them, but also, in the first century, that was a way to enter into philosophical or theological conversation. So again, we're not really clear as to what's happening. And then Jesus begins to interpret the scriptures for them. And they don't yet get it. And then finally, in the breaking of the bread, when he did what he had always done with them and what has become our practice, he took the bread, he blessed the bread, he broke the bread, and he gave it to them. And in that moment, finally their eyes are opened. But I don't think Luke wants us to limit the opening of their eyes to just that moment. Because when they recount the story to one another, they say, "Were not our hearts burning within us? Something was going on." And, by the way, the word heart, I often avoid it because we 21st century Western culture people tend to, when we hear the word heart, we think emotion and we give it a kind of a second-class status. But in the scriptures, the heart has the first-class status because it's the container of the self. It's the container of the memory, the will, the understanding, and the emotion, and it's from the heart that we live and that we act and that we choose. And so it's in a sense When we say heart in the Scriptures, we often mean the whole self. So we burning as he was walking with us on the way and telling us the stories of himself from the Old Testament Scriptures. And so, in this Emmaus encounter, there's the intersection of their experiences, the experiences of the community, and those experiences connected with the Scriptures, and their life together at the table, which we will understand as our Eucharistic life together. They wouldn't have used those words in the first century, but that's how they shared life together, was at the breaking of the bread. And by the way, it's therefore very Anglican. And I want us to really hear that. We understand our experiences in light of the Scriptures, and we understand the Scriptures in light of our experiences, and we become a community as we share life together. And in all of that, God becomes known to us. The sharing of our stories, the pondering of the Scriptures, the liturgy itself. We find Him. What kept them from recognizing Him? They saw Him, but they didn't recognize Him. They heard the Scriptures, but they didn't understand them. Why? Why do you suppose that was so? Do you understand that your life is nothing but a projection? I like to say we all live out our own home movie. Whatever is going on, my home movie is projected upon it. And that creates an expectation. It creates a limited worldview because I'm really living out of my life. Now, to the extent I'm self-aware and open, I don't have to be quite so limited by it. But a man will never know what it is to be a woman. You understand that? You've been living with that a while, right? Women, the man will never know what it is to be you, right? What we can possibly do, though, is listen and be open to the experience of the other, if we are willing to do that. In that moment, on the road to Emmaus, in one sense, they were talking about all of these things, but they had this image of what was supposed to happen, how Jesus was supposed to redeem Israel and be their hope. And because that hadn't happened, they were closed off to understanding it differently. And even though they had heard stories that Jesus had been raised, they were not really open to encountering Him. Make sense? How do you receive the presence of Jesus? How is He made known to you? How is it in the telling of the stories of your life and in the reading of the Scriptures and in the sharing of life together in our Eucharistic community? How is it that you see Jesus? I would suggest that if you're looking to see Him, you will miss Him. I suggest that if you're looking to hear Him, you will miss Him. I would suggest that if you're looking to feel Him, you will miss Him. How is it that we open ourselves to the spiritual level of our being and find Him there? And then from there, how does that radiate into our other faculties? I want to tell you a story about Luke and Lucy. And I have permission from their parents to tell this story, at least have permission from their father to tell the story. Their mom's out of town. About 3 or some odd years ago, Ivor Benjamin began visiting churches in the valley because he and his family were going to relocate here. And he visited several churches, and recently he told me that when he came to St. Barnabas and saw the way the children came into worship and the way we responded to the children, his search was over. He said, this is the place for my family. And he shared that with Amy, and they came and visited with Luke and Lucy, and actually now they have another child, Cole, and they decided this was their home. Amy agreed. And by the way, Ivor is now on our vestry, a new vestry member of St. Barnabas. And so Amy and Ivor and Lucy and Luke began making their way out of church. And in those first few Sundays, as I recall, Luke and Lucy were being carried. They were about 1.5 years old, if I remember right. They were being carried out of church. And Luke would always engage me at the door. Lucy would lay, you know how a child drapes themselves upon you? Lucy was draped on her mom or her dad, and she would not look at me. Lucy was shy, and she would just be withdrawn. And I would allow that, and by the way, their parents would allow that. Their parents didn't say, come on, Lucy, say hi to Father Jim and push her. They might say it once, but they didn't force her. They let Lucy be Lucy. And I would, tickle her, and she might grin, but she wouldn't look at me. Luke, on the other hand, was giving me a high five right away. He was out there. It wasn't long before they were toddling out of church. And in the beginning, both of them were a little bit reserved. Lucy was hiding typically behind Dad, and every once in a while, she'd peer out from behind Dad's leg. Just shy. Luke was a little reserved, and I was very careful. By the way, I don't think I know very few things worth knowing that my children didn't teach me. You understand that? The problem is that I was stupid for too long. It took me too long to understand all the things they were teaching me. So one of the things they taught me is to greet children where they are, not where I am. Now, you would think that I should have known that, but I didn't. So by now, I'm just present there for Luke and Lucy, just there receiving them. And little by little, didn't take Luke long, he gets more aggressive, and pretty soon he's running out of church and burying his face right here, wrapping his arms around me. And on the way in and on the way out, he gives me a high five. Lucy is still hiding behind Dad. She just peers out behind Dad. And for Dad and Mom, that's okay. And for me, that's okay. One of the things I was also aware of, at least whether or not it's true, in my mind was Lucy was watching how I responded to Luke. So I was careful not to get too gregarious with Luke. Now, we're talking 3 years. And little by little, this connection grows as they make their way out of church. And some Sundays they're more forward, and some Sundays they're less. And little by little, I would bend down and peer around the corner of typically Ivor's leg and try to greet Lucy, but just carefully. And one morning I stuck my hand out to give her a pinky shake. Lucy put her hand out there and gave me a pinky shake. Little by little. And then one morning, I do not know why, Lucy came out and hugged my neck, just once. I've often wondered if my response to that was too much, that's why it hasn't happened again. I do not know. I do not know. And this is the Luke and Lucy story, but we have such stories with lots of children at St. Barnabas. And so, a couple of weeks ago, at our last vestry meeting, we were telling stories, and Ivor told me this story. After Easter, when all the festivities were over and they were at home talking